almost impossible to put into scale the unimaginable power of these floodwaters. But right behind me, we can see proof of them. But there's another mystery to solve. Okay, when we think about eroding rocks, that seems like something that should take thousands, millions of years even. How did a flood that only lasted a couple of days?
We don't have a lot of human artifacts or fossils associated with the lake emptying, but we know we had animals and humans in the area during this time.
One morning, engineers opened massive steel gates and released water into a place that had not seen a flowing river for millions of years. The water did not trickle in. It surged forward with immense force, racing into a dry riverbed carved by ancient geology and long buried beneath heat, stone, and dust. At its peak, more than 260,000 gallons of water per second poured through the channel. Sand that had not moved in decades lifted into the current. Rocks rumbled. The river level rose more than 15 feet in a matter of hours. No one knew how the canyon would respond to that pressure. Until that moment, there had been nothing here but desert. What followed became the largest intentional flood ever created in the United States. And it was only the beginning. At 6:20 in the morning on March 26, 1996, engineers at Glen Canyon Dam opened the first of 4 giant jet tubes. These tubes are enormous steel conduits that allow water to bypass the hydroelectric turbines and flow directly into the river below. Over the next 9 hours, all 4 were opened, and then the 8 main turbines were switched on. The flow rate climbed to more than 330,000 gallons per second. Every 2 seconds, enough water passed through the dam to fill an Olympic-sized swimming pool. As the release intensified, the Colorado River rose nearly 16 feet above its normal level. Over the course of a single week, more than 238 billion gallons of water rushed through the Grand Canyon. Nothing like this had ever been attempted before. This was not an accident or a failure. It was deliberate. To understand why anyone would flood a canyon on purpose, it is necessary to understand what had happened to the river long before that day. The Colorado River begins high in the Rocky Mountains and once flowed uninterrupted through 7 U.S. states and 2 Mexican states, all the way to the Gulf of California. For millions of years, it carried vast amounts of water, sand, and silt through the Grand Canyon, reshaping its walls and sustaining life across the Southwest. Today, that river rarely reaches the sea. When researchers visited the river's delta in Mexico in recent decades, they found no flowing water. Only dust, cracked mud, and dry channels remained. The Colorado, once one of North America's most powerful rivers, had been reduced to a controlled stream that often failed to complete its natural journey. The turning point came in the mid-20th century. The Colorado River is now one of the most heavily managed rivers on Earth. 15 major dams sit along its main course, with hundreds more on its tributaries. Every mile of its flow is regulated, diverted, stored, and released according to human demand. The most consequential of these structures is the Glen Canyon Dam. Completed in 1963 by the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the dam rises more than 700 feet above the riverbed and stretches over 1,500 feet across the canyon. It blocked nearly 190 miles of the river and created Lake Powell, the second largest reservoir in the United States. From that moment on, everything downstream changed. Before the dam, the Colorado followed a natural rhythm. Snowmelt in spring and summer triggered powerful floods that carried millions of tons of sand and sediment into the Grand Canyon each year. These floods rebuilt sandbars, reshaped beaches, cleared debris from rapids, and deposited fresh sediment along the riverbanks. After the dam, that sediment stopped moving. Sand and silt now settle at the bottom of Lake Powell, trapped behind concrete. Less than 10% of the sediment that once flowed into the Grand Canyon still makes it through. Within a decade of the dam's completion, scientists noticed the first warning signs. Sandbars began to shrink. Beaches that once reappeared every year after seasonal floods failed to recover. In Marble Canyon, the upper section of the Grand Canyon, changes were especially severe. River guides who had rafted the canyon for decades watched familiar campsites disappear. Where water retreated, vegetation moved in. Native plants like coyote willow were joined by invasive species such as tamarisk, camelthorn, and Bermuda grass. At the same time, mesquite trees that once grew near the river began to die as water levels stabilized farther from the banks. The river had become colder, clearer, and more predictable. But ecologically, it was unraveling. By the 1980s, more than 90% of the sand that once nourished the canyon was gone. At first, the changes looked positive in some ways. Trout populations exploded in the cold, clear water released from the dam, creating a thriving sport fishery. Stable water levels allowed trees and shrubs to grow into dense corridors of green along the riverbanks, attracting birds and wildlife. But these benefits masked a deeper problem. The canyon was losing its ability to renew itself. In 1983, nature forced a reckoning. Heavy snowmelt caused Lake Powell to rise rapidly, and engineers were forced to release water through emergency spillways. Huge tunnels carved directly into the canyon walls. As water surged through them at extraordinary speeds, something went wrong. The water turned red. The flow was so powerful that it stripped concrete from the spillway walls and tore chunks of sandstone from the surrounding rock. Cavitation, tiny vapor bubbles collapsing with explosive force, threatened to destroy the tunnels entirely. For a time, there was serious concern that the dam itself could be damaged. The crisis was contained, and the spillways were later redesigned. But when the water receded downstream, scientists and river guides noticed something remarkable. Fresh sand covered stretches of the canyon that had been bare for years. Invasive plants had been scoured away. New beaches appeared. The river briefly behaved like it used to. That event changed everything. It revealed what scientists had missed for decades. Floods were not just destructive forces to be controlled. They were essential to the canyon's survival. This realization led to an unprecedented experiment. In 1996, scientists and engineers deliberately recreated a flood. They called it an experimental high-flow release. The goal was to mimic the river's natural spring floods and see whether lost sandbars and beaches could be rebuilt. The first experiment showed mixed results. In the initial days, sand settled and new beaches formed. Researchers were encouraged. But months later, when the dam returned to normal operations, much of that sand washed downstream and disappeared again. Still, the experiment revealed something crucial. Timing mattered. Sand enters the Colorado River mainly through tributaries like the Paria River. If a flood occurs too early, there is not enough sediment to redistribute. Too late, and the sand has already been carried away. Artificial floods must occur precisely when fresh sediment is present. Subsequent releases in 2004 and 2008 were timed more carefully. During these floods, water flow reached nearly 290,000 gallons per second. The river turned muddy. Whirlpools formed. Sandbars re-emerged where they had vanished decades earlier. Each experiment refined the strategy. Eventually, a new management system was adopted. Instead of scheduling floods years in advance, releases would occur only when natural conditions were right. Cameras, sensors, and sediment measurements now determine when enough sand has accumulated to justify a flood. When the moment comes, engineers open the gates. The benefits extend beyond scenery. Sandbars create calm backwaters below rapids, critical habitats where fish spawn and juvenile species survive. They anchor vegetation that stabilizes riverbanks. Most importantly, sand protects archaeological sites, some more than 9,000 years old. Along the Colorado River corridor lie thousands of cultural sites built by the ancestors of modern Native American tribes. Stone dwellings, storage structures, irrigation systems, trails, petroglyphs, and ancient campsites depend on sand cover to shield them from wind and rain. Without it, these sites erode rapidly and are lost forever. But every flood comes at a cost. When water bypasses the turbines at Glen Canyon Dam, electricity is not generated. Power companies lose millions of dollars with each release. The first experimental flood in 1996 cost an estimated $1.8 million in lost revenue, not including scientific monitoring and research. This creates an ongoing conflict. The dam supplies electricity to multiple states across the Southwest. Every gallon of water has economic value. Releasing water for the river means less power for cities and potentially more reliance on fossil fuels elsewhere. At the same time, the Colorado River is under unprecedented strain. More than 40 million people rely on its water. It irrigates over 5 million acres of farmland. It supports 11 national parks and nearly 20 Native American tribes. And the Southwest is now experiencing the worst drought in at least 1,200 years. Climate change has reduced snowpack. Population growth has increased demand. The river is governed by agreements written more than a century ago, when the region was sparsely populated and water seemed limitless. Today, the math no longer works. If the Colorado continues to decline, the consequences for the Grand Canyon are severe. Groundwater levels are already falling. Vegetation is thinning. Heat intensifies. Wildlife retreats. Rafting, a cultural and economic lifeline for the region, becomes impossible. Controlled floods alone cannot save the river. They are a temporary measure, a way to buy time. Long-term survival depends on water conservation, updated policies, efficient irrigation, reuse of wastewater, and difficult decisions about how water is shared. These solutions are expensive, politically complex, and slow to implement. But the alternative is clear. Without intervention, a river that carved one of the greatest natural wonders on Earth could fail within a human lifetime. The Colorado has flowed through the Grand Canyon for 6 million years. Now its future depends not on geology or climate alone, but on whether modern society can learn to live within its limits. These solutions are expensive, politically complex, and slow to implement. But the alternative is clear. Without intervention, a river that carved one of the greatest natural wonders on Earth could fail within a human lifetime. The Colorado has flowed through the Grand Canyon for 6 million years. Now its future depends not on geology or climate alone, but on whether modern society can learn to live within its limits.